Good morning, and a particular welcome if you've only just joined us at our Festival of Pilgrimage today. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York. Amongst many other claims to fame, it surely goes without saying that he is, to date at least, the only Archbishop of York to have been confirmed by Zoom. I had already invited Stephen to speak to us at this event towards the end of last year, before the news came of his new appointment to York. And I will confess that within about 30 seconds of seeing the news of his appointment on Twitter, I messaged him just to check that he would still be able to join us today. And I'm really pleased that he said yes and that he is here this morning. So, Archbishop Stephen, over to you.
Sisters and brothers, it's great to be with you today. I'm really sorry that I'm not with you in person and I'm just speaking to you like this. But maybe that is the first thing we need to learn about pilgrimage at the moment. It's quite hard to go on pilgrimage. For years, I found myself saying, when I gave talks about pilgrimage, I found myself saying, hey, we must be the first generation of Christians who think that pilgrimage is about arriving rather than traveling. What I mean by that is, so many churches now say we're going to have a parish pilgrimage. What they mean by that is they're going to book a coach, they're going to go to some holy place, I don't know, Walsingham, St Albans, York Minster. They're going to go somewhere on the coach, they're going to get out of the coach, they're going to have a service in the holy place, they're going to hit the gift shops, have lunch, get on the coach and come home. And they've been on pilgrimage. Well, to state the obvious, none of our Christian forebears would recognize that as a pilgrimage, because the important thing about pilgrimage was making the journey. It's good to have a destination, but all the things that you're going to learn are going to be learned on the road. It's about traveling rather than arriving. And yet now, as I'll come on to speak about in a minute, we find ourselves in that strange place where we are invited to consider the possibility of going on pilgrimage without actually leaving. How can we inhabit life with the spirit of a pilgrim during these strange days when we've been through lockdown, we can't meet in the way that we want to meet, and we can't do the things we want to do? Having said that, I did manage to make one walking pilgrimage during lockdown. I'm now the Archbishop of York, as some of you may know, and I'm speaking to you from Bishopthorpe Palace outside York. And as I prepared to make the move from Bishop of Chelmsford to Archbishop of York, I walked to Bradwell, which is the ancient chapel built by St Ced in 654, and it was wonderful to walk there. So, what am I sharing with you today? Really just two simple things. First of all, that pilgrimage is fundamentally about making a journey, but also I want to offer the invitation that pilgrimage can also be a state of mind. It can be about making interior journeys and about inhabiting life with the spirit of a pilgrim. So what is the spirit of a pilgrim? Well, I've spent, I've been on lots of pilgrimages. It started when I was a parish priest. I went to a parish where there weren't any children or young people in the congregation. I really wanted to get some children's work and youth work started. To cut a long story short, the way that I decided to do that was to go on pilgrimage. I was a vicar in Chichester in the deep south, and I walked one summer from Chichester to Canterbury, most of which is along the old Canterbury Way, which is now the South Downs Way. And about 10 or a dozen young people came with me. And it was a most moving, glorious, quite tough experience. And over the subsequent years, I've walked to York twice, I walked to Glastonbury, I've walked to Walsingham, and yes, to Canterbury. And then a few years ago, when I was given some sabbatical leave by the church, and before I got too decrepit, I walked the great Camino to Santiago de Compostela. I walked the Camino del Norte, joined it at Santander, walked about 500 miles to Santiago. And it is, of course, the great and famous walking pilgrimage. What did I learn on all this walking? Well, things that you can carry with you as a pilgrim through life, whether you're actually making a physical journey or not. The first thing I learned was about traveling light. I learned how little you actually need. When I walked to Santiago, I was quite pleased with myself. I weighed my rucksack on the day before I left, and it only weighed just over 9 kilograms. And I thought, that's good, I'm traveling light. But after a couple of days, I discovered that I had too much stuff, that you don't actually need 9 kilograms of stuff. You can get by with less. And what I can assure you, northern Spain is very mountainous. And when you're walking, in fairly hot sun, up fairly steep gradients, every ounce counts and you shed it if you possibly can. So to put it a bit crudely, I took with me 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of knickers, 3 shirts. And I discovered I didn't need that. You can get by with 2. Wash one, wear one, wash one, wear one. And that's what I did. And that was a sobering discovery, to discover just how little I needed. And of course, when I came home and surveyed all the stuff that I'm surrounded with and sometimes burdened down with, so often we can find ourselves ending up being possessed by our possessions. It was good to be on the road and discover how little you actually need. So that was the first thing I learned. I learned how to travel light. I also learned, and I'm not quite sure how best to put this, I learned that there is a space between A and B. Let me try and explain what I mean. Most of us, most of the time, when we're traveling around, we like to get from A to B in the shortest possible time by the quickest possible route. And we pride ourselves on doing that. But the danger is that we're moving so quickly from A to B, we never notice what is between A and B. And when you walk somewhere, or when you inhabit life with the spirit of a pilgrim, you start to notice things. And that was, I think, my first great discovery, where the phrase I used to describe it to myself was, Stephen, at last, you've slowed down to God's pace. In fact, I'd put it even stronger than that. I discovered that one of the best ways of being still is to move gently and purposefully. I found I was better able to find an interior stillness, a deep appreciation of what was in front of me and what was around me, and a deep appreciation of this present moment where I am now, by walking and by looking and by observing. There's a wonderful passage in a book by the Canadian author Douglas Copeland, where he talks about the joys of collecting stones and shells and pebbles on the beach, which is something I suppose all of us have done from time to time. And he just says, I'm quoting from memory, he says something like, I love walking along the beach. I love looking out for beautiful stones and shells and pebbles. I love collecting them and putting them in my pocket and taking some of them home. I know you're often not supposed to do that, but we all do. And then he says this. He says, but the more I look, the more I notice that every stone and every shell and every pebble on the beach is beautiful. And so then you get this kind of coming into your mind, this kind of incredible gospel kingdom profligate image of trying to pick up the whole beach and put it in your pocket. Why? Because every stone is beautiful. Every stone is beautiful. And that was one of the gifts I received on pilgrimage. When I slowed down, when I discovered a bit of stillness in my life, when I started actually not focusing on where I was getting to, but focusing on this step I'm taking now, well, I can't think of a better way of putting it. I discovered all the stones are beautiful. I mean, for me, it happened with a camera. Well, not a camera, I had my phone with me. and northern Spain is beautiful. And I found that every few moments I wanted to get out my phone and take a picture. You know, every turn of the road. I mean, I walked the Camino del Norte. The other reason I walked it is because I thought I won't get lost, or it'd be harder to get lost, because the northern Camino starts in Irun. If you can put up in your mind a map of Spain, you basically go all the way along the northern coast of Spain and then turn left at Galicia down to Santiago. So I thought, well, if I keep the mountains on my left and the sea on my right, I won't be able to get lost. And a lot of the walking is along these beautiful, beautiful mountainous coastal footpaths. And the views are fantastic. And after a couple of days, I said, Stephen, put the wretched phone away. You can't take a photograph of everything. And if you do, all that you're doing is experiencing it all secondhand. Every stone is beautiful. Every view is beautiful. Every blade of grass is beautiful. Just dwell in that moment. Another thing I did as I walked, I set myself the happy little task of writing a sonnet each day. It's a kind of mad thing to do, but I mean, I was walking, you're walking for 9, 10, 11 hours each day. You're on your own in the mountains. There's nothing else to do as you walk. So I thought, well, I'll try and write a sonnet every day. I never thought of them. I did it for my own joy, really, as a way of perhaps kind of gathering the things that were happening to me and giving them some expression. And I thought, well, with a sonnet, it's only 14 lines. I can kind of compose it in my head as I walk. And then in the evenings, when I stayed at these little pilgrim hostels, I could write it down. So, I mean, they eventually, I can thoroughly recommend it. They've been published, called Striking Out, which is a deliberate kind of, treble meaning. Striking out meaning I'm setting off, but striking out meaning actually I'm putting a bit of a red pen through my life. I'm radically simplifying my life to this next step, only taking with me what I need, only observing what's in front of me. Hey, that did my heart good to simplify my life like that. But let me just read you one of the poems. It's called The Spaces in Between, and it kind of just sums up that different way of inhabiting life, which I experienced on the road and which I long for, and which I promise you I'm going to come on to say, this might be a way of being a pilgrim without ever actually setting foot at all, because some of us can't, because we just can't, and because of the restrictions we're living under at the moment. Between A and B, there is a vast space. But with eyes on the road and a brisk pace, you'll never see it. It is warm and slow. It finds the contours of the land and goes the same speed as you. If you make your goal the destination, then you'll never know how to travel well. Oh, such misery is heaped upon the world by those who move quickly and think only of the end. Another way is waiting, and all that it requires is what you've already got: time, candor, and a sturdy pair of shoes. Between A and B, there is a space. It is here and now. It is your life, if you choose. So you won't be surprised to hear I could say a lot more about the things I learned and have learned and carry on learning on pilgrimage. Since walking the Camino 4 years ago, I then walked the Camino Inglés 2 years ago. I'm dreaming of walking the Portuguese Camino next year. I walked to Bradwell a couple of months ago. Going on pilgrimage has become a really important part of my life. And I do it for the sheer joy of doing it, but I also do it because I long to inhabit life as a pilgrim. And that's what particularly interests me about where we are as we live with COVID-19, as we try to inhabit the world in this way, and as we see the opportunities to live and build a different world that arise from it, seems to me the things that we learn on pilgrimage are so important. Is there anything more important for our world to learn at the moment than how to travel light? I mean, actually, it was on the Camino that I think that phrase in the Lord's Prayer that we say every day suddenly became real. Give us today our daily bread. I mean, we all say those words, those of us who are Christians, day after day after day. Give us today our daily bread. But do we stop to think what they might mean? And I think what they mean, amongst other things, is give me, Lord, today enough for today. And save me, stop me, prevent me from wanting more. And when you travel light, when everything you have is on your back, when you're dependent upon the hospitality of strangers, where you don't know where you're going to sleep that night, suddenly that, Lord, just give me enough for today, suddenly that becomes very real. And as we seek to rebuild the world, that's the kind of spirit we need as a human family, as the household of the world. We need to learn how to travel light. We need a much greater appreciation of what is before us. And I also believe that as well as inhabiting the world with the spirit of a pilgrim, you can, in your imaginations, go on pilgrimage without actually leaving. And I've been particularly interested in this recently with a book that I read by a man called Gavin Wakefield. It's called Saints and Holy Places of Yorkshire. I am the Archbishop of York, so I do need to big up Yorkshire. Saints and Holy Places of Yorkshire, a pilgrim guide to God's own county. Now, I think Gavin wrote the book thinking that when people go on pilgrimage and visit the great holy sites, Whitby, Ripon, places like that, York, in Yorkshire, this is a book that will help them understand and put these places in context. But I read this book during the heart of lockdown, and I tried to read it, as it were, with the spirit of a pilgrim. And as I read the book and the prayers in the book, I kind of found myself going on pilgrimage in my imagination from my armchair. And there's another similar book. I'm afraid I haven't been able to track down the name of it. I do apologise. But it's by Stephen Need. And it very much is, I think it might even be subtitled An Armchair Pilgrimage to the Holy Land, but I'm afraid I probably misrepresented him. But look it up, Stephen Need, a book about the Holy Land. And it's consciously trying to do the same thing, to say, you can make this journey in your minds and in your imaginations. So, let me start to draw this to a conclusion, as there's a danger I will run away with myself, which is precisely what I'm saying we shouldn't be doing. We should take life one step at a time and inhabit life one step at a time. The reason we go on pilgrimage is to learn that we are called to inhabit life as a pilgrim, that the whole of life is a journey home to God. And when we make a pilgrimage, be it an actual pilgrimage, which is a glorious thing to do, but don't book the coach, go on foot if you can, or whether, for all sorts of reasons, we can't do that, we make a pilgrimage in our imaginations, it is in order to learn things about how we're supposed to travel through life, of which there are many others I could speak about. But the ones that seem to me to be the most important and most relevant for our world today is about learning what enough looks like, learning how to travel light, learning how to appreciate what's in front of us. And perhaps I'd very quickly add to that as well, learning to realize that you can't choose your fellow travelers. Again, when you're up in the mountains and you're walking along, if you happen to encounter a fellow pilgrim who's also walking at about the same pace as you, then they are your companion whether you like it or not. You could put on blinkers and pretend they're not there, but hey, it's much better to reach out and to love them. That might be a message for the church in particular. In the church, we do like to choose our fellow travellers, whereas actually God has lumped us all together, whether we like it or not. So let me finish with another poem. I'm not quite sure which one to read. I've chosen a few that I thought might be relevant and helpful, but I think I'll finish with perhaps a sadder one. This is actually one I wrote when I got home, and I couldn't stop dreaming about, even though it's nearly 4 years ago that I walked that great long Camino, it's vividly alive in my head. I daydream about it far too much and long to be on the road again. So this is a poem I wrote looking back on the pilgrimage, and I suppose almost a prayer that I might be given the grace to hold on to the things I learned, that I could live my life as pilgrim. And it's a poem actually written months later, at that time of the year where it's still the last of winter, but spring is beginning to emerge. And it begins by looking into the sky. Today, the sky comes courtesy of Miro, pallid blocks of light, sharp shards of ice. Imprisoned bulbs, still locked in hard earth tight, lift periscopal shoots to chart the light. The lime trees, silent vigil undisturbed, look out upon the passing of the world. And round the ivy weaving, weeping willow, all the hopes of spring erupt and flow. At night, the stars resume their long regress, stretching into all too patient darkness. Some things will never happen. This one will, no matter how each sunset scoffs and thrills. All then will rest, enfolded in the sweet, remembered hopefulness all pilgrims keep. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Stephen. Can I just invite you to cast your mind back a few months, the last time that we had a conversation like this? It was February. You were Bishop of Chelmsford, and you spoke about pilgrimage with your usual passion and verve, and we could practically see the audience all Googling for kind of walking boots and guidebooks. So my first question is, it has been quite a 6 months, has it not? And I wonder how it's been for you.
Yes, well, I think for most of us, and particularly for me, I can't pretend it hasn't been a difficult year. I'm a person who likes to be with people. I get my energy from being out and about and being with people, and all the things which usually fire me and inspire me and sustain me, all of them have been stripped away. But as I began to explore in the talk, which bore, as I'm sure you noticed, strong resemblances to the talk I gave at the beginning of the year, there are also differences. And for me particularly, it's been that bit of pilgrimage which is about having your life stripped back. And there's nothing good about that. I don't want to romanticize that. To have your life stripped back can be extremely painful. And I've been blessed and fortunate that even though I have now moved house, both the houses I've lived in this year have had, large outdoor spaces. So it hasn't been so bad for me. but to have your life stripped back, although painful, is illuminating. And all the great spiritual writers speak about the unmasking of illusion as being one of the first steps in the spiritual journey. So, yeah, it's been hugely painful. I wish it hadn't happened, but goodness me, the whole world has had its illusions unmasked this year, me included.
Yes, I was very struck by your phrase about every stone is beautiful. And I've had, and again, this kind of constrictions we've had on us. I had my own very real experience in the last fortnight. I've been in quarantine because I had the cheek to go on holiday, and they changed the rules while we were away. And like you, very, very lucky having an outside space. And one of the things that it meant for me was that my morning run was no longer around the usual routes. And I found myself running around the garden and feeling slightly embarrassed about that, thinking about the neighbours who were probably hooting with laughter at the sight of this woman going round and round. And so for the first couple of days, I found myself quite cross, really, a bit foolish and quite cross to be hemmed in. And then something I noticed, which I can't believe how striking it was, I could really smell the apples on the trees, and I could really smell the plums in a way that I don't think I would have done under any other circumstances. And I think, I don't know, do you think sometimes the narrowing of our horizons just help us to see more clearly sometimes?
Yeah, I think it can. Again, I don't want to over spiritualize it or romanticize it, because it does so much depend upon your circumstances. But certainly that's been my experience. So we always had a little vegetable patch where I used to live in Essex. This year we probably gave it greater care and attention than it's ever had. And perhaps part of the God's humor on this is, of course, we moved just at harvest time. So I don't quite know what's happened to all our vegetables. I did say to the team who work there, please help yourselves and pick them. I came up with a big bag of green tomatoes, which are sitting on my windowsill ripening. But I grieve for the other things left behind.
I quite agree, but God's bounty goes on, does it not?
Yeah.
Now we've got a couple of questions in. Somebody's asking, saying in the Orthodox tradition, the journey is not so much the point. It's much more about what we do when we arrive. I just wonder if you've got any reflections on that.
Yeah, so I think, is that from Peter Doll? And
Yes.
Far be it from me, Peter was a colleague of mine when I was in the Oxford Diocese. Far be it from me to disagree with Peter. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think clearly there's probably there may well be greater emphasis. I simply don't know. There may be greater emphasis on the arrival in the Orthodox tradition. But every pilgrimage requires a journey, so the traveling is always part of it. And certainly, I'm speaking very personally. For me, it seems that the traveling is the important thing. And certainly in the Western tradition, I mean, think of Chaucer. It's what happens on the journey which is really the most interesting. But of course, a journey does need a destination. But I'm firmly committed to those sets of ideas which surround the notion of traveling well and of how we can inhabit life as a pilgrim.
And of course, part of the arrival is actually also the fact you've got to come home again, haven't you? And you've referred to your restlessness and how you've sort of dreamed of going back on the road. I think very often, actually, that can be quite difficult, can't it? Coming home, you've had this wonderful experience. It's been very enriching. And then you've got to come home and somehow sort of integrate that experience into your life. I don't know how that's for you.
Absolutely, Sarah. When I did walk to Santiago, the big walk that I did, as I said, I've been back since on doing a smaller pilgrimage, although small, still 100 miles. I just wanted to keep walking. It was great to arrive, but my overwhelming desire was to keep walking, and there was a great sadness that the journey had come to an end. And of course, medieval pilgrims, they would have kept walking because they'd have turned around and walked back. I didn't. I got on a plane, and I met a man actually over the summer. Well, no, it can't have been over the summer. I've just told a lie. It must have been pre-lockdown. I met a man pre-lockdown. It must have been the beginning of the year. Who that's precisely what he did. He walked from England to Rome and then turned around and walked back again.
That
And
is
that would have been the way.
extraordinary.
That would have been the way the medieval pilgrims did it. So in that sense, they had an advantage over us. There was never an end to the journeying. Whereas we because we think of holidays, we put the journey into a compartment. So my hope is, and I live it out very poorly, but my hope is that I might be a pilgrim every day. That those things that I learned on the road and continue to learn might be marks of my Christian life. And in that way, the journey carries on.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. That somebody who has asked exactly that question. How do you, particularly in such an incredibly demanding public role, how do you maintain a pilgrimage state of mind? And I wonder if you've got anything you could share on that in a little bit more detail.
Yes, well, of course, I probably can't. Certainly, I'm very glad you can just see here what's behind me. I'm very glad you can't see where I live, because I think I could be accused of many things as Archbishop of York, but when it comes to my house, travelling light is not the phrase that springs to mind. But I think it is about those attitudes with which you travel through life. The attitudes you have to your possessions, the attitudes you have to food and drink and the things that you need. And one of the great spiritual disciplines has always been the examination of conscience, the examination of life, trying in a healthy and retaining your good humor, actually saying, what do I need in life? And it's in those ways. Sorry to be able to offer nothing more profound than those ancient Christian disciplines of prayer and penitence and self-examination. These are the things that make us into pilgrims in daily life.
And you referred to give us our daily bread and that being enough for today, and how we need that spirit as we rebuild our world. Can you be any more concrete about how would you say that when you're speaking to government, for example? How can we get that message across?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that Christians should be very concerned about and should be active in is trying to offer the world a different narrative about how we inhabit the world. And again, we don't want to romanticize what's happened this year, but the whole planet heaved a sigh of relief for a month or so at the start of the lockdown. Cars, I mean, as I saw on Twitter yesterday, somebody saying that they'd filled up their car with petrol for the first time in 6 months. So using our cars less, planes sitting on runways, the planet heaved a sigh of relief. And as we now move into, well, we're in a very difficult phase right now, but as we have been in this phase of wanting to get the economy up and running again, we need to be in the forefront and be the people who are asking the questions: what does a good economy look like? And if a good economy isn't taking account of the needs of the planet and of the needs of the poor, if we're not asking those questions, then the economy might be up and running and producing profit and rising share prices in the short term, but we know that it will kill us. So I think Christians need to take every opportunity at the local level and at the national level of saying there is a different way of inhabiting the world. And I certainly intend to try to use the new position that I now have to tell that story. And I know people will accuse me of being foolish and naive, but well, I think I probably welcome that. I am foolish and naive.
Yeah. Yes. And I think one of the things that we've discovered through all of this is just how incredibly interlinked everything is. We're all bound together by these kind of tiny webs, so that one decision about not going to the office affects something else or somebody else or transport and so on. And I think maybe that's something we reclaim through pilgrimage, is this sense of connectedness. I don't know, does that make sense? Is that one of the things?
Yeah, it does. But I think what I would encourage people to do is to go on pilgrimage, because I think there's things you learn with your head which become much more real when you experience them physically and emotionally through the act of making the journey. So I know that's hard at the moment, but it's not impossible. And actually, of course, walking is one of the things you can do. Now, I know, of course, that won't be possible for absolutely everybody. But being outside walking, especially walking on your own or in a group of no less than 6, is something that we can do. And introducing a little bit of vulnerability into your life will turn out to be a blessing. So the thing I think, there's all sorts of sensible things we could do. Read a book or write to your MP or get involved in other things, and we shouldn't stop doing those things. But I think we might be surprised by how we learn the same things in a kind of different way by the act of making the journey. And just the little journey. I had a dream at the beginning of the year when we met. I had a dream which I hadn't actually spoken to many people about, but I was going to be. I still haven't been installed in York Minster. That hasn't happened yet. I had this dream that I'd walk from Essex to York and arrive on the morning of the installation and be installed, and I'd arrive on foot. And that in itself, I hoped would be a message. Obviously, that didn't happen. And instead, I made this relatively little pilgrimage, 30 miles or so, to Bradwell, which is the great holy place in Essex associated with St. Ced, the monk from Lindisfarne. And there are so many places there's people listening, I guess, from all over the world, but I'm thinking of the UK. There are so many places in the UK. There's been much work, which I'm sure the conference is publicising, about pilgrim routes, particularly in the north of England. I'm at the moment beginning to plan walking the St Cuthbert's Way to Durham, perhaps later this year or early next year. Yeah. And so I would encourage people to say, let's try to learn these things in a different way by becoming a pilgrim and making a journey.
And I think you've touched on something. Pilgrimage has become incredibly popular in recent years, hasn't it? And somebody's put something in the chat about those BBC programmes. I don't know if you've seen them, where they take a group of people. Yeah. Sort of celebrities, and I don't know whether you've watched them and enjoyed them or been irritated by them, or I think they provoke a certain reaction in people. But why do you think pilgrimage is so popular at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I need to go back to my dear friend Peter Dole and say I think that's the that's the other thing about the journey is, as I think I said in the talk. The danger now is that the interest in pilgrim is becoming a kind of ecclesiastical sightseeing. So it's interesting going to a holy place in a coach. So I'd strongly encourage people to actually make a journey on foot or on a bike or in whatever way they can, but to make the journey the really central bit of the pilgrimage experience. I don't really know why there's such interest in it. Partly, I guess, it's a reaction against perhaps a reaction against the modern tourist industry, which is all about kind of ticking off, seeing things, which I find I've always found slightly grotesque myself. I don't like a city break. And the reason I don't like a city break is not that you can have them much at the moment, but I didn't like a city break because I kind of felt overwhelmed by all the things, this might be the only time I ever go to, I don't know, Florence or wherever. I've got to see this, and this. And you sort of charge around actually often not seeing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I've become much more interested in learning to love, the blades of grass growing on my patio than I have the El Grecos. I mean, obviously, I want to see both.
Yeah.
But learning that every stone is beautiful requires you to put yourself in a place where you are simply walking. You're at walking pace. You're not going to get to Florence, but you are going to get to that corner just there. So learn to love it. So they're the blessings. And I suppose maybe those TV programs are a reaction against all of that. I haven't actually seen them. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen
Right.
the odd clip, but I haven't seen them. I think I'd have got too irritated by them.
I think probably my colleague Sally would say the same, that they're quite irritating if pilgrimage is something that's very dear to you. Now, someone's just put in a question in the comment about if there are more lockdowns and we end up having to walk back over the same ground day after day, and I'm sure some of us had that experience earlier in the year. We were desperate to get out for our daily walk. And actually, you do your couple of circuits, and there aren't that many variations depending on where you live. And someone's just saying, is there a way in which we can get to know the place for a first time? And how do we make it fresh? I think is the thinking when we end up walking the same route. So it's not just about going somewhere new.
Yeah, I mean, really, really hard. I think it's probably. I mean, I do apologise whoever's asked this question. I'm not sure I've got anything really helpful to say. I mean, I think if you're able to observing the change of the seasons and appreciating that more is clearly something that can be done. But I think maybe trying to look much more carefully. I was very moved years ago listening to an interview of David Hockney. And I mean, David Hockney, obviously a great painter, but he draws beautifully, and his drawings are fabulous. And this was a sort of TV documentary, and he was asked about, his skill as somebody who draws. How did he acquire the skill? They were thinking about, obviously, the skill with his hands. And he replied, I can't remember the exact words he used, but he said that the art of being able to draw, the skill that you need to acquire, is the ability to look. He said drawing is not about what you do with your hand, first of all. It's about what you do with your eyes. It's about looking, really looking. And most of us, myself included, don't look. Our eyes pass over, and of course, the modern world of social media and the internet only encourage us. Dare I say this? I mean, I saw somebody recently who better remain nameless. Not a fellow bishop, of course, but it was a younger person. They were on a dating. They had their phone and they were on a dating, dating app. And you swipe left or you swipe right, and so these human beings flash up before you, and you decide in an instant whether you like them or not. And it's terrible. It's terrible. But of course, that is how we look at the world now. We're endlessly flicking and clicking from one thing to another, and so we're losing. If we ever had it, we're losing the ability to spend time looking at one thing. So that's the invitation. If you're making the same walk each day, is to look longer and more deeply at the things that you have. Either that, or see if you can vary the walk.
Yes. So thinking that,
one other thing, very very quickly, Sarah. One other thing which occurred to me as well, which I don't think I mentioned in the talk, is about walking to church. Those of us who can still get to church. It did occur to me that your local church is your local holy place. And perhaps if we could think of the local church as place of pilgrimage, and make the going to church part of the experience of being the church, and walk to church on Sunday morning, And it needn't necessarily take much longer, because one thing I've noticed in these COVID days, without hymns, church services have become shorter. So it'll still be the same amount of time overall if you walk there.
And that, in fact, was one of the huge sadnesses when churches were locked during the beginning of all this. I know people in the village where I live, not churchgoers, but people who were just really sad that they couldn't go to their quiet and beautiful place. And I think that was a real heartbreak, actually, for a lot of people. Now,
yes, it was.
Yeah, can I ask about social media? Do you tweet when you're on pilgrimage? Because you're very active on Twitter, or do you switch off?
When I walked to Santiago, which was a month of walking, I tweeted as I arrived, and I didn't tweet again until I got there. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but part of what I wanted was solitude and having life stripped back. And so
Yes.
I fasted from social media.
Because there's this thing very often you see when people are, travelers or tourists, that's different, but, they only know they're there because they've taken a selfie of themselves there, which is always weird. But yeah, that sort of leads neatly to a couple of questions that have come in that I think are related, are the sort of difference between going on pilgrimage on your own or going with a group. What do you think the differences are? And somebody else has said, do you feel the pressure to minister to others who you encounter on the way? Is it, do you manage to switch off? Maybe you get recognized, I don't know, but do you feel the need? Are you able to sort of, is it selfish to say, no, this is my time?
Yes, certainly the walk to Santiago, the long walk. I like many clergy, when you're on holiday, this wasn't holiday, well, it was holy day. I don't lie about what I do, but I don't advertise the fact. And so I'd kind of thought, if anybody does ask me what I do, then I thought I'll probably tell them I'm a priest rather than say I'm a bishop.
Yeah.
I am a priest, so it wasn't actually a lie, but I thought it'd make life simpler. But the great thing sadly, certainly the Camino I walked, I only think I met about 3 or 4 English people in the whole month. So, and not many people walk the Camino del Norte. So I did meet people, but nobody. I think right in the last week there was a Irish Roman Catholic priest who we had a conversation about church matters, and he spent about an hour moaning about his bishop to me. And I told him I was a priest, and so we were talking as it were, priest to priest. And I felt slightly bad that I hadn't told him I was a bishop as well. So that evening, I found him in one of the bars, and we had a drink. And I said, perhaps I ought to tell you I'm a bishop as well. I said, but I haven't. I'd rather you kept it to yourself. I've not been advertising the fact. Next day, a couple of people who I'd got to know, because you get to know the people who are walking the same pace as you, came and said, "Oh, I hear you're a bishop." So I thought, "Oh well, thank you, Father, for sharing that with everybody." The business about solo and group, it's a very different experience. I've done both. I alluded in my talk to, I've led a lot of walking pilgrimages with young people to Canterbury, Glastonbury, Walsingham, York, which was wonderful thing to do with young people. But it's a very different experience when you're walking as part of a group. And of course, the conversations you have are incredibly rich. There's something about conversation when you're side to side with somebody that's very different from when you're face to face. And then when you add in not just side to side, but space and time, silence is much easier to deal with when you're walking side by side with someone. So I found when I've walked with groups, and of course, when I've walked with groups, I've always been the leader of the pilgrimage, and usually with young people. So I've been a different sort of relationship. I've found I've had the most profound conversations.
It's like that thing when you've got teenagers and you're doing the washing up together. You can sort of talk, or in the car or whatever, you can have conversations.
Yeah.
Do you come back from something like that? Are you exhausted by the effort of it all, or are you enriched when you have taken it?
Yeah, a bit of both. I think my personality is one that I get energy from from being with people and doing things like that. But I really remember when I walked to Canterbury with some young people from when I was a parish priest, and we walked from Chichester to Canterbury, which is about 150 miles. It's really the South Downs Way, as you probably know, is the old Pilgrim Way. I remember back in the parish the following week, and this lady, member of the congregation, bumped into the street, and I was Father Stephen in those days. She said, "Oh, Father Stephen, it must be nice to be back in the real world." And I kind of wanted to scream inside and say to her, "This isn't the real world. This is the artificial one." The world that I discovered with those young people on the road, the conversations I had, celebrating the Eucharist by the side of the road, with a tin cup and a plate, and sleeping on the floor in church halls, that was real. And the intensity of life and the relationships that were built, which I've carried on. There was a young man who knocked on the vicarage door a week or two before we set off, to ask whether he could come on the pilgrimage because a friend of his at school was coming. Never been to church in his life, this lad. And I said to him, "Well, yes, you could come, with parental permission and filling in the forms." And there was time to do all that. I said, "But you will need to follow the rules." And he said, "What are the rules?" I said, "Well, the rules are we do everything together. You can't go off on your own. We do everything together, and we will be celebrating the Eucharist every day." So I said, "You'll have to. I don't expect you to say anything. I wouldn't expect anyone to say the words if you don't believe them. But you can't actually go off and do your own thing because we haven't got enough leaders. So we do everything together. We walk together. We sleep on the floor in church halls together. We pray together. If you can sign up for that, you can come." So he did, and took for the first few days, and then somewhere between Chichester and Canterbury, looking back, he saw, didn't his heart burn within him as we walked and talked on the road? He that's how many years ago is that? That was 1989. He's now a priest. That young man. He found something on the road. So yes, walking with a group is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, but it's a very different experience to walking on your own, which is also wonderful.
Yeah. Yes. So have you got any big plans? I think planning is one of the things that's been so difficult at this time. I have to say, as somebody who kind of runs events as part of, what I do for a living, I also have 2 children who have both chosen this moment to get engaged and to try and get married, which has been incredibly difficult. So I think we've all started thinking very differently about planning, but I wondered what your plans are. You said you want to do the St Cuthbert Way. Have you got any other particular pilgrimages that you would love to do when it is possible?
Yeah, well, I have, it's so hackneyed, I'm embarrassed, but I have fallen in love with the Camino, and there's something about Santiago, walking there, that really makes my heart sing. So I would like to walk the Portuguese Camino. That's the one I want to walk next, and that might be possible next year. And I'd need to find about a fortnight, and I'd probably do it with Rebecca, my wife. We'd probably do that one together.
Would that be the first time for her?
No. She and I walked the Camino Inglés. So we walked it, which is if you want the experience of walking an ancient Camino, that I'd really recommend the Camino Inglés from Ferrol or Corunna. It's about 120 kilometers. 120 kilometers. You can do it comfortably if you're reasonably fit. You can do it comfortably in 6 days. So it fits in nicely into a week's holiday. And so we did that together 2 years ago. And we think we can go a bit further. So we're thinking about that. But that will depend on things. But there's so many wonderful, as I know, there's so many wonderful pilgrimage routes in this country that will definitely be part of our holidaying and resourcing over the coming year.
Right. Wonderful. I think that's a really good note on which to end. So huge thanks for joining us today, Archbishop Stephen. It's been a privilege and a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. I'll just say to those watching that the Festival Bookshop has free postage today on a list of specially selected titles, which absolutely, I'm sure, will include, several of Stephen Cottrell's books. And the details will be on screen. You can just follow the links. We're going to take a short break again now. Do come back at 12 noon when we'll be joined by the Bishop of Norwich, Graham Usher. Thank you very much.